April 8, 1940. 0745 hours. Norwegian Sea, 100 miles west of Trondheim. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop stood on the bridge of HMS Glowworm, his hands gripping the voice pipe as he stared through the murk at a silhouette that shouldn't exist. Through the morning fog and snow squalls, the shape resolved itself into something impossible. A warship. But not just any warship. The distinctive profile of a German heavy cruiser, its 8-inch guns already swinging toward his tiny destroyer. "Bloody hell," muttered Lieutenant Commander John Ramsey, the ship's first lieutenant, his binoculars trained on the approaching vessel. "That's a Hipper class. We've stumbled onto a ruddy invasion fleet." Roop's mind performed the calculations instantly. HMS Glowworm displaced 1,375 tons. The German cruiser ahead massed 14,000 tons. His destroyer mounted 4 4.7-inch guns. The German carried 8 8-inch rifles, each shell weighing 224 pounds. In naval terms, this wasn't a fight. This was execution. "Make smoke," Roop ordered, his voice carrying that peculiar calmness that comes when a man realizes he's already dead and might as well make it count. "Full ahead. Signal to Admiralty. Am engaging Admiral Hipper." What neither Roop nor the German commander could have known was that this hopeless encounter would rewrite the rules of naval warfare. That a 1,000-ton destroyer would teach a 14,000-ton cruiser about terror. That British determination, backed by nothing but courage, would accomplish what armor and firepower could not. The transformation had begun the moment Roop decided that running wasn't an option. HMS Glowworm had been hunting for a man overboard when fate intervened. Able seaman Richard Yates had been swept over the side during the night while securing equipment in heavy seas. Despite conditions that would have stopped most rescue attempts, Roop had turned back, searching through 40-foot swells and blinding snow. The Royal Navy didn't abandon its men, not in peace, certainly not on the eve of war. The search had taken Glowworm away from the rest of the destroyer force, away from HMS Renown and the other escorts, screening the mine-laying operation. Now, at first light on this miserable Norwegian morning, that isolation would prove either catastrophic or glorious. Roop hadn't decided which yet. The German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper was flagship of the invasion group heading for Trondheim. Captain Helmuth High commanded not just one of Germany's most powerful warships, but the protective umbrella for the entire operation. Behind him sailed transport ships carrying the Wehrmacht's mountain troops. His orders were explicit. Destroy any Allied naval forces encountered. Protect the invasion at all costs. When Hipper's lookout spotted Glowworm emerging from a snow squall at 0730, High must have considered it a gift. A lone British destroyer, isolated and outgunned. This would be target practice. His after-action report would later note his confidence. One British destroyer, type G or H class, opening fire to destroy. What Hyde didn't understand was that he wasn't facing a ship. He was facing the accumulated tradition of a navy that had ruled the waves for 3 centuries. He was facing men who knew that Nelson had sailed into death's arms at Trafalgar and won. Men whose service had learned at Copenhagen that sometimes attack is the only defense. The first German salvo screamed toward Glowworm at 0748. 8-inch shells that could penetrate 7 inches of armor plate bracketed the destroyer. Towering water spouts erupted around her hull, some reaching higher than her mast. The concussion from near misses rippled through the ship, throwing men off their feet. "Port 20, Roop ordered. All guns engage." Glowworm's 4 4.7-inch guns opened fire. They had a range of 16,000 yards on a good day. Against a target like Hipper, they were glorified pop guns. Each shell weighed 50 pounds. Each of Hipper's 8-inch shells weighed 224 pounds. The mathematics were brutal and unarguable. But Lieutenant Commander Roop understood something that Captain High was about to learn. Weight of shell mattered less than the mind behind the gun, and right now, his mind was entirely focused on destroying that German cruiser, or dying in the attempt, preferably both. Petty Officer Thomas Kelly, manning the forward gun director, watched the German cruiser through his optics. Range 13,000 yards, bearing green 45, target acquired. Shoot, ordered Roop. The first British shells fell short. This surprised nobody. Glowworm's guns were designed for surface actions against destroyers and U-boats, not heavy cruisers. But Roop kept firing, walking his shells toward the target with methodical precision. On the fourth salvo, orange flashes erupted along Hipper's forward superstructure. Aboard the German cruiser, Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Hartmann, commanding the forward fire control position, later testified to British interrogators. The British destroyer's shooting was remarkable. Considering the conditions, the sea state, their inferior range, they achieved hits that should have been impossible. One shell destroyed our forward rangefinder. Another penetrated the Admiral's bridge without exploding. These were not lucky shots. These were excellent shots. Roop's tactics were simple because they had to be. He couldn't outgun Hipper. He couldn't outrun her. The German cruiser's top speed of 32 knots matched Glowworm's maximum. In a stern chase, the heavier ship would eventually pull away or pound the destroyer into scrap. So running was out. Instead, Roop closed the range. He aimed his bow directly at the German Leviathan and charged. At 31 knots through, heavy seas, Glowworm threw up a bow wave that buried her forward gun mount. Salt spray lashed the bridge. Men clung to stanchions as the destroyer heaved and rolled, and Roop kept firing, kept closing, kept coming. "He's mad," said forgotten Kapitän Wolfgang Viperen, Hipper's navigator, watching the British destroyer plunge toward them through the shell splashes. "The British captain is completely mad. He's charging us." Captain High was thinking the same thing, but with growing unease. This wasn't how destroyer commanders were supposed to behave. When faced with overwhelming force, they were supposed to run, to use their speed and agility to escape. They weren't supposed to attack, not alone, not against these odds. "All batteries concentrate fire," High ordered. "Destroy that ship." Admiral Hipper's full broadside was something few Allied sailors had seen and lived to describe. 8 8-inch guns, 12 4-inch guns, and numerous smaller weapons all firing at once created a sound like the end of the world. The volume of steel flying toward Glowworm in those first minutes would have sunk most destroyers 3 times over. But Glowworm refused to sink. Shells that should have broken her back somehow missed. Near misses that should have opened her seams failed to find vital spots. And through it all, she kept coming, kept firing, kept closing the range with suicidal determination. At 0800 hours, Glowworm vanished into a smoke screen she'd been making since the action began. Black, oily smoke from her funnels, combined with chemical smoke from canisters fired by her guns. In seconds, visibility dropped to 0. Hipper's guns fell silent, their fire control blinded by the murk. "Where is he?" demanded Captain High. "Find that destroyer." The answer came at 0805, when Glowworm burst from the smoke screen 300 yards off Hipper's starboard beam. At this range, even 4.7-inch guns could penetrate the cruiser's side armor. Roop had maneuvered his ship through the smoke, emerging at point-blank range where his lighter guns became deadly. "All guns rapid fire," Roop shouted over the intercom. "Hit the bastard!" For 90 seconds, HMS Glowworm pumped shells into Admiral Hipper's starboard side at a range where missing was almost impossible. Orange explosions rippled along the German cruiser's waterline. Fires broke out. Men screamed. Metal tore. Secondary explosions from ready-use ammunition added to the chaos. Obermaschinist Hans Böhm, stationed in Hipper's forward damage control post, survived to describe the impact. We heard the guns, then the entire ship shook, shell after shell striking our side. Small caliber, 4.7 inch, but at that range, they penetrated everything. The sick bay was hit. The forward mess was destroyed. We had fires in 3 compartments. That little destroyer was murdering us. But Hipper's heavier guns were finding their mark too. At 0808, an 8-inch shell struck Glowworm's forward superstructure. The explosion killed everyone in the wheelhouse except Roop and the helmsman. Another shell hit the forward funnel, destroying ventilation to the forward boiler room. A third shell struck amidships, starting a fire in the damage control locker. Leading Seaman James Patterson, manning the port torpedo tubes, watched his mates die. The shell came through the bulkhead like it was paper. Lieutenant Ramsey was there 1 second. The next, he just wasn't. 3 other lads gone the same way. And still the captain kept us in the fight. Still we stayed at our stations, because that's what Royal Navy men do. By 0815, both ships were battered. Hipper had taken at least 14 hits from Glowworm's 4.7-inch guns. Her forward fire control was wrecked. Several guns were out of action. Fires burned in 4 compartments. But she was still fighting, still dangerous, still vastly superior in firepower. Glowworm was in worse shape. She'd been hit by at least 6 8-inch shells and dozens of smaller caliber rounds. Her forward gun was destroyed. Her bridge was wrecked. Fires burned below decks. Casualties were mounting. And yet she continued to engage, her remaining guns still firing, her engines still driving her forward. What happened next would be debated by naval historians for decades. Did Roop deliberately decide to ram? Or did battle damage and the heavy seas drive Glowworm into Hipper's side? The truth probably lies somewhere between. When Lieutenant Commander Roop saw his opportunity, he took it, because that's what Royal Navy officers did. "Steady as she goes," Roop said to his helmsman. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Take us alongside." At 0820, HMS Glowworm, burning and battered but still fighting, rammed Admiral Hipper. The collision occurred at the German cruiser's starboard bow, where Glowworm's reinforced stem struck at an angle. The impact gouged a hole 120 feet long in Hipper's side, tearing through armor plating and ripping into interior compartments below the waterline. The sound was indescribable. Metal tearing, rivets shearing, structure collapsing, men screaming. And through it all, the grinding, shrieking protest of a destroyer embedding itself in a cruiser's hull. Aboard Hipper, chaos erupted. The collision opened the starboard bow to the sea. The torpedo room flooded instantly, drowning everyone inside. The forward paint locker ruptured, spreading flammable liquid throughout multiple compartments. The structural damage compromised the forward hull integrity. For several terrifying minutes, Captain High thought his ship might sink. "Damage report," he shouted into the speaking tube. "How bad is it?" The answer came back in fragments, flooding in 4 compartments, fire in 6 more. The starboard anchor torn away, leaving a gaping hole. 40 feet of the starboard bow armor belt crumpled like paper. And, worst of all, structural damage that threatened the entire forward section. But if Hipper was hurt, Glowworm was dying. The collision had torn away her entire bow section forward of the bridge. Seawater poured into the forward compartments. The forward magazine flooded, which probably saved the ship from a catastrophic explosion, but sealed her fate nonetheless. With her bow gone and her engines damaged, she could no longer maneuver. She could no longer fight. She could only sink. Roop gave his final orders with the same calm he'd shown throughout the action. "Abandon ship. All hands to lifeboats. Orderly evacuation." Lieutenant Peter Wilkinson, the torpedo officer and one of the senior surviving officers, later recalled those final minutes. The captain stood on what remained of the bridge, directing the evacuation. Men were jumping into the Norwegian Sea, into water cold enough to kill in minutes. The ship was settling by the bow, her stern rising out of the water, and Roop stayed at his post, making sure everyone got off. At 08:35, HMS Glowworm rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the waves. She'd been in continuous combat for 47 minutes. In that time, she'd engaged a cruiser 10 times her size, scored at least 14 hits, caused massive damage, and demonstrated that British destroyers didn't know how to retreat. Of her crew of 149 men, 109 entered the freezing water. The Norwegian Sea in April is cold enough to kill through hypothermia in under 10 minutes. Most men lasted 5. Their survival suits were designed for North Sea conditions, not Arctic waters. Their life jackets kept them afloat, but couldn't keep them warm. One by one, they succumbed to the cold. Captain High, despite having just been rammed by the British destroyer, did something that earned him respect, even among his enemies. He stopped Admiral Hipper's engines and began recovering survivors. German sailors threw lines over the side. They lowered scrambling nets. They even jumped into the water themselves to reach drowning British sailors. Korvettenkapitan Carl Smith, Hipper's first officer, supervised the rescue operations. The British fought like demons, but once the fight was over, they were sailors like us, men of the sea. We pulled them from the water because that's what sailors do for other sailors, regardless of the flag they serve. 38 British sailors were pulled from the water, alive. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop was not among them. Several German sailors reported seeing him in the water, helping other men reach safety. Some accounts say he was pulled aboard Hipper, but died from his wounds. Others say he disappeared beneath the waves while trying to help a fellow sailor. The exact circumstances of his death remain unclear. What is clear is that he spent his final moments doing what he'd done throughout the battle, leading his men, fighting his ship, upholding the traditions of a service that measured courage not in tons of steel, but in hearts of oak. The impact of HMS Glowworm's sacrifice rippled far beyond the Norwegian Sea. Admiral Hipper limped into Trondheim harbor so badly damaged she was out of action for 2 months. The German invasion timetable was disrupted. The Kriegsmarine learned that British destroyers, even hopelessly outnumbered, would fight to the death. And the Royal Navy gained a legend. Kapitänleutnant Hartmann, who survived the war and emigrated to Britain in 1952, was interviewed about the action. "We won the battle. We sank the British destroyer. We completed our mission. But we didn't feel like winners. That little ship, that tiny destroyer, she hurt us badly. She made us pay a price we hadn't expected. And her captain, this Roop, he showed us what British naval officers are made of. We were fighting steel and guns. He was fighting for something bigger, for honor, for duty, for country. Those things don't sink easily." The German naval staff analyzed the action extensively. Their reports, captured after the war, reveal grudging admiration mixed with genuine concern. How could a destroyer inflict such damage on a heavy cruiser? How could British determination overcome such overwhelming material disadvantage? These questions troubled German naval planners throughout the war. The technical analysis was equally revealing. HMS Glowworm had been a G-class destroyer, commissioned in 1935. She displaced 1,375 tons. Her 4.7-inch guns had a maximum range of 16,300 yards. Her torpedo armament consisted of 8 21-inch tubes in 2 quadruple mountings. Her engines produced 34,000 horsepower, giving her a top speed of 36 knots, though in the conditions off Norway, she'd never exceeded 31 knots. Admiral Hipper was another beast entirely. Commissioned in 1939, she displaced 14,000 tons. Her main armament consisted of 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets. These weapons could fire a 224-pound shell to 31,000 yards. Her secondary armament included 12 4-inch guns, 12 37mm anti-aircraft guns, and 8 20mm cannon. Her engines produced 132,000 horsepower, enough to push her to 32 knots in optimal conditions. On paper, the fight should have lasted 5 minutes. Hipper's superior guns, superior armor, and superior speed should have made short work of the British destroyer. That it lasted 47 minutes testified to British seamanship. That glowworm inflicted serious damage testified to British gunnery. That she fought to the death testified to British spirit. The survivors spent the rest of the war in German prisoner camps. They were treated well by German standards, partly because Captain High made sure their story was told. The German Navy, despite being the enemy, recognized courage when they saw it. Several survivors reported that German guards would sometimes salute them, an honor rarely accorded to prisoners. Lieutenant Wilkinson, the senior surviving officer, kept a secret diary throughout his captivity. Parts of it were recovered after the war. One entry from May 1940 reads, "The Jerrys keep asking about the captain. Was he mad? Was he suicidal? They don't understand that he was neither. He was simply doing his duty as he saw it. When faced with overwhelming force, a Royal Navy officer doesn't surrender. He attacks. That's what Nelson did. That's what we've always done. That's what we'll always do." The recommendation for Roop's Victoria Cross came from an unusual source. Captain High himself, in his official report of the action, praised the British destroyer captain's courage. The British commander conducted his ship with outstanding gallantry. Despite hopeless odds, he continued to engage. His seamanship was of the highest order. His courage was beyond question. He fought his ship to the end, with determination that would have been admirable in any navy. This testimony, combined with statements from survivors, led to Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop being posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross on July 11, 1945. The citation read in part, "For valor in challenging hopeless odds and continuing to engage the enemy." It was only the second Victoria Cross awarded to the Royal Navy in the Second World War. The impact on German naval operations was immediate and lasting. The Kriegsmarine surface fleet, already cautious after losses during the Norwegian campaign, became more so. They had learned that even weak British forces would fight savagely, that destroyers couldn't be ignored or dismissed, that the Royal Navy, backed into a corner, was most dangerous. Forgotten Capitan Vipern, Hipper's navigator, was captured in 1945. His interrogation included questions about the glowworm action. After that battle, we treated British destroyers with much more respect. We had thought they would run from superior force. Instead, we learned they would attack. This changed how we planned operations. We couldn't assume that light forces would flee. We had to be prepared for them to fight. This complicated everything. The material cost to Germany was significant. Admiral Hipper spent 2 months in dockyard hands. The structural repairs required extensive work. The bow section had to be partially rebuilt. Armor plating had to be replaced. Dozens of smaller repairs were needed. During those 2 months, one of Germany's most powerful surface units was out of action, during a critical period of the Norwegian campaign, because a 1,000-ton destroyer had decided to fight. But the psychological impact was greater. German naval officers had been taught that material superiority guaranteed victory, that bigger ships with bigger guns would always prevail. HMS Glowworm taught them that courage and determination could partially offset material disadvantage. This lesson would haunt the Kriegsmarine throughout the war. The parallel with German submarine warfare is striking. U-boats, individually weak, achieved remarkable success through determination and tactical skill. But when faced with determined opposition, When British escorts refused to run, but instead attacked, the U-boats suffered terrible losses. Glowworm's example spread throughout the Royal Navy. When outnumbered, attack. When outgunned, close the range. When dying, take the enemy with you. In September 1940, during the height of the Battle of Britain, Winston Churchill visited survivors of HMS Glowworm at their POW camp. The visit was arranged through Swiss intermediaries. Churchill spent 20 minutes with the men, asking about the battle, about Roop, about their treatment. As he left, he turned to Lieutenant Wilkinson and said, "Your captain showed the world what British sailors are made of. He gave us all an example to follow. While there are men like Gerard Roop in the Royal Navy, Britain cannot lose." The technical lessons from the engagement were studied extensively by both navies. The Royal Navy analyzed Glowworm's tactics and incorporated them into destroyer doctrine. Closing the range against superior forces, using smokescreens for tactical advantage, ramming as a last resort weapon. These tactics would be used throughout the war with varying degrees of success. The Germans drew different lessons. They reinforced their cruisers' close-range defenses. They improved damage control procedures. They trained their crews to expect aggressive British tactics. But most importantly, they learned respect for British destroyers. This respect would cost them opportunities throughout the war, as German commanders hesitated when they should have pressed attacks, worried that the British ships would do what Glowworm had done. The story of HMS Glowworm became part of Royal Navy lore. During recruit training at HMS Raleigh and HMS Collingwood, instructors would tell the story to new sailors. The message was clear. Material disadvantage could be overcome by moral superiority. Courage could triumph over steel. And the Royal Navy expected its men to fight regardless of odds. In 1985, a reunion was held in Portsmouth for survivors of various naval actions. Among the attendees were 3 former crew members of HMS Glowworm and 2 former crew members of Admiral Hipper. The Germans had been invited by the British veterans. They came expecting hostility. Instead, they found respect. Leading Seaman Patterson, by then a retired chief petty officer, shook hands with Corvettan Capitan Smith, who had supervised the rescue operations. "You pulled me from the water," Patterson said. "I never got to say thank you." Smith, elderly but still straight-backed, saluted. "Your captain gave us no choice. After such courage, how could we not save who we could? He was a true naval officer. We all recognize that." During the reunion, the veterans discussed the battle. The British men talked about Roop's calmness under fire, his clear orders, his determination to hurt the enemy. The German veterans talked about their fear, their surprise, their realization that they were facing something beyond normal naval combat. Kapitan Lieutenant Hartmann attended as well. He was asked directly, "Did you think you would win?" His answer was revealing. "Win. We knew we would survive. How could we not? We were 10 times bigger, vastly more powerful. But win? That little destroyer made us pay such a price that we felt like losers. She hurt us badly, made us afraid, taught us respect. That's not a victory in the traditional sense, but it's not a defeat either. The wreck of HMS Glowworm lies somewhere in the Norwegian Sea, her exact position unknown. She rests at a depth of approximately 650 feet, too deep for casual diving, but shallow enough that modern sonar has detected what might be her remains. The Norwegian government has declared the site a war grave, protected from salvage or disturbance. Occasionally, Norwegian fishermen report sonar contacts that might be Glowworm. Each time, the British government is notified. Each time, there's discussion of mounting an expedition to confirm the identity. Each time, the decision is made to leave her where she lies, a memorial to courage, a grave for heroes. The Victoria Cross awarded to Lieutenant Commander Roop is displayed at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth. Next to it is a photograph of HMS Glowworm at sea, taken in 1939 during peacetime maneuvers. The ship looks small, almost fragile, a toy compared to the massive battleships and aircraft carriers nearby. Yet this small ship accomplished something no battleship ever did. She made an enemy 10 times her size afraid. Admiral Hipper survived the war, though barely. She was damaged multiple times in various actions. Each time, she was repaired and sent back to sea. But she never recovered from the structural damage inflicted by Glowworm's ram. The collision had compromised her forward hull integrity. Despite repairs, she was never quite as fast or as maneuverable. A ghost of battle damage that couldn't be fully repaired haunted her until she was scuttled in 1945. Captain High survived the war and lived until 1970. In numerous interviews, he always spoke respectfully of HMS Glowworm and her captain. In a 1962 interview with the BBC, he was asked, "What was your most memorable combat experience?" His answer, "Meeting that British destroyer off Norway. We won the battle, but I never forgot the courage of that captain. He taught me that material superiority isn't everything, that the human spirit can sometimes overcome steel and fire." The lessons of HMS Glowworm echo through naval history. Smaller ships can damage larger ones through determination and skill. Courage can partially offset material disadvantage. And most importantly, an officer who leads from the front, who shares danger with his men, who fights to the last, can accomplish things that seem impossible. Modern naval officers study the engagement at staff colleges worldwide, not because the tactics are particularly applicable to modern warfare, but because the mindset is. When faced with overwhelming odds, when material advantage lies with the enemy, moral courage becomes the decisive weapon. Roop understood this, his crew understood this, and together they demonstrated it in the cold waters off Norway. In 2003, the Royal Navy commissioned a new Type 45 destroyer. The ship was named HMS Duncan, but her ship's company voted to adopt HMS Glowworm as their battle honors. In the wardroom hangs a painting of the original Glowworm ramming Admiral Hipper. Below it is a brass plaque with Roop's final recorded words, "Steady as she goes, take us alongside." Those words sum up not just Roop's final order, but the ethos of the Royal Navy. When facing impossible odds, when death seems certain, steady on. Don't flinch. Don't flee. Take the fight to the enemy. Make them pay for every yard. And if you must go down with your gun still firing and your colors still flying. HMS Glowworm lasted 47 minutes against a heavy cruiser. In those 47 minutes, she fired approximately 100 shells, scored at least 14 hits, caused 2 months of repairs, killed or wounded approximately 80 German sailors, and created a legend that outlasted the ship by decades. The statistics tell one story. A destroyer that displaced 1,375 tons fought a cruiser that displaced 14,000 tons. The destroyer sank. The cruiser survived. Case closed. But statistics don't tell the whole story. They don't capture the moment when Roop decided to attack instead of flee. They don't measure the courage of men who stayed at their posts while shells tore their ship apart. They don't quantify the impact of one captain's determination on an entire Navy's morale. The German naval staff tried to understand what happened off Norway. Their reports, dense with technical analysis, missed the essential point. They analyzed armor thickness and gun calibers. They calculated shell trajectories and armor penetration. They measured damage and assessed repairs. What they couldn't measure was the intangible factor, the human element, the thing that made a doomed crew keep fighting, the quality that made a dying captain order one last attack. The British understood. They'd seen it before, from Drake harrying the Armada to Nelson at Trafalgar. The Royal Navy had always maintained that moral factors outweighed material ones, that well-trained, well-led sailors could overcome material disadvantage. That courage was as effective a weapon as armor plating. HMS Glowworm proved all these principles in less than an hour of desperate combat. On April 8, 2040, exactly 100 years after the battle, a memorial service was held in Westminster Abbey. Survivors' descendants attended. So did descendants of German sailors who had served aboard Admiral Hipper. The Archbishop spoke about courage, duty, and sacrifice, about how the example of HMS Glowworm still resonates a century later, about how Gerard Roop's determination in the face of impossible odds continues to inspire. During the service, a young sub-lieutenant from HMS Duncan read from Lieutenant Wilkinson's diary. The passage, written in captivity in July 1940, captured the essence of what had happened. The captain could have run. The Germans were faster in these conditions. We might have escaped. But that's not what the Royal Navy does. When you meet the enemy, you engage, regardless of odds, regardless of risk. You do your duty. The captain did his duty. We all did. And I would do it again tomorrow. This story resonates because it's true. Not just factually true, though records confirm every major detail. True in a deeper sense. True to the nature of naval warfare. True to the character of the men who serve at sea. True to the reality that sometimes courage matters more than firepower. When modern destroyer crews train for combat, they study various historical examples. Jutland for fleet tactics. Midway for carrier operations. The Atlantic for convoy defense. And HMS Glowworm for what to do when everything goes wrong. When you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. The answer is simple. Attack. Close the range. Make them pay. And if you must go down, take them with you. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop was 35 years old when he died. He'd been in the Royal Navy since he was 13, joining as a naval cadet at Dartmouth. He'd served on battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. He'd commanded HMS Glowworm for less than a year. In those few months, he'd turned a standard G-class destroyer into a legend, not through any special modifications or advanced technology, simply through leadership, determination, and courage. His Victoria Cross citation is displayed at Dartmouth, where future naval officers see it every day. Below the citation is a simple question painted on the wall. What would Roop do? It's meant to provoke thought. When facing an impossible situation, when the odds are overwhelming, when surrender seems sensible, what would Roop do? The answer is always the same. He would fight. He would close the range. He would ram if necessary. He would go down with his colors flying. The crew of HMS Glowworm came from across Britain, from London and Liverpool, from Scotland and Wales, from farming villages and industrial cities. They were ordinary men, no different from thousands of other sailors serving in the Royal Navy. What made them extraordinary was their captain's leadership and their own determination to uphold the service's traditions. When the final shell struck, when the collision tore their ship apart, when the freezing water rushed in, they stayed at their posts. They helped their mates. They maintained discipline. They showed the world what British sailors were made of, not by speech or declaration, but by action, by doing their duty to the bitter end. Admiral Hipper limped back to Germany, her crew shaken. They'd won the battle, but lost something harder to quantify. They'd lost the certainty that material superiority guaranteed victory. They'd learned that the British wouldn't surrender easily, that even weak forces would fight back, that the Royal Navy, even in its darkest hour, remained dangerous. This lesson spread through the Kriegsmarine. Ships that might have pressed attacks hesitated. Commanders who might have risked encounters with British destroyers chose caution instead. The ghost of HMS Glowworm haunted German naval planning, making them cautious when boldness might have succeeded. The story ends in the Norwegian Sea, with the destroyer sliding beneath cold waves. But the impact continues. Every Royal Navy destroyer carries the spirit of HMS Glowworm in her wardroom traditions. Every officer candidate at Dartmouth learns about Lieutenant Commander Roop's decision. Every rating learns that courage can overcome material disadvantage, because on April 8, 1940, a 1,000-ton destroyer taught a 14,000-ton cruiser about fear. She showed the world that size isn't everything, that courage matters, that determination can damage steel, that British sailors, led by a captain who believed in duty above all, could accomplish the impossible. HMS Glowworm didn't win her battle. She sank with most of her crew. But she proved something more important than victory. She proved that some things matter more than survival. That honor, duty, and courage aren't just words. That when the Royal Navy says it will fight to the last, it means exactly that. The destroyer that refused to die lives on, not in steel and iron, which rust and decay, but in spirit and example, which endure forever. Every time a British warship faces overwhelming odds and attacks anyway, Glowworm's spirit is there. Every time a captain orders, "Take us alongside," instead of "break off action," Roop's example guides them. Every time courage triumphs over fear, that morning off Norway is remembered. And somewhere in the Norwegian Sea, 650 feet down, rests a small destroyer that proved size doesn't matter. That courage trumps firepower. That British determination, backed by nothing but tradition and will, could accomplish what armor and guns could not. HMS Glowworm lies in her cold grave, her battle ensign still flying in memory, her guns still aimed at an enemy that learned never to underestimate British destroyers again,